What does a journey through the wilderness have to teach us about faith, trust, and obedience? In today's episode, we explore Numbers, a book that tells the story of Israel's 40 years in the desert, filled with challenges, doubts, and divine provision. As the Israelites march toward the Promised Land, we see lessons about the importance of trusting God's plan and timing. What can we learn from their journey that applies to our lives today? Let's walk through the wilderness and uncover the power of God's guidance.
Ready for an adventure? Today, we're trekking through the book of Numbers.
The fourth book of the Bible.
Exactly. Chronicling the Israelites' journey.
Their epic 40-year trek through the desert.
After escaping, of course, slavery in Egypt.
And it might seem like ancient history.
Right.
But you'd be surprised how much it resonates.
Oh, absolutely.
With challenges we face today,
Totally.
like navigating uncertainty, wrestling with faith.
Yeah, figuring out how to trust in something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly.
Okay, so the source material describes this wilderness as a powerful symbol.
Yeah.
But it's more than just...
It's much more than just sand and scorpions, yeah.
Right.
Think about it, for the Israelites, the wilderness was a very real place.
Right.
But it also represents those times in our own lives where we feel lost.
Uh-huh.
Disoriented, maybe even a bit terrified.
Lost in our own thoughts.
Like we're wandering in a metaphorical desert, unsure of which way to turn.
That's so true. I've definitely felt that wilderness feeling before.
Haven't we all?
Yeah. But the book of Numbers suggests that those periods of testing
Yeah.
can also be times of incredible transformation.
That's the key. The wilderness isn't just about hardship.
Okay.
It's about how we respond to hardship.
Okay.
Look at the Israelites. They complained about food,
Right.
questioned Moses' leadership, even rebelled against God.
Yeah, it's familiar.
Sound familiar?
Well, I'm not about to start worshiping a golden calf anytime soon, but
Yeah.
yeah, I get it.
Right.
We all face those moments of doubt.
Sure.
But how did those experiences actually shape the Israelites?
Think of the wilderness as a crucible, a place where their faith was tested.
Okay.
And refined each challenge, each act of disobedience, forced them to confront their fears, and ultimately deepen their reliance on God.
So it's less about avoiding the wilderness and more about how we journey through it.
Exactly. And the book of Numbers gives us a roadmap.
Okay.
It shows us how to lean on God's guidance, how to learn from our mistakes, and how to emerge from those difficult seasons stronger and more resilient.
The source material also dives into some specific examples of the Israelites' rebellion, like when they flat out refused to enter the Promised Land.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they had been wandering for 40 years. Talk about a lack of follow-through.
It's fascinating, isn't it? They were so close to their destination,
Right.
yet fear held them back. They saw giants in the land and panicked, forgetting all the miracles they'd already witnessed.
Wow.
Their lack of trust in God's promises ultimately delayed their entry into the Promised Land by an entire generation.
Wow. That's a sobering thought. It makes me wonder if we sometimes hold ourselves back because of our own fears and anxieties.
It's possible.
Are there promised lands in our lives that we're too scared to enter?
It's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
Are we willing to trust God's plan for our lives even when it feels risky or uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Or do we let our doubts and fears dictate our decisions?
Right.
The Israelites' experience is a cautionary tale,
Uh-huh.
but it also reminds us that God is patient and merciful even when we mess up.
Okay, but let's not forget the amazing ways God provided for the Israelites in the wilderness.
Oh, I agree.
Manna from heaven, water from a rock. It's like a divine survival kit.
It is, and I think it speaks to a fundamental truth even in the most barren of circumstances.
Uh-huh.
When we feel utterly depleted, God can provide for us in ways we could never imagine.
I like that.
It might not be literal manna or a magical spring,
Right.
but it's that unexpected support, that timely provision that reminds us we're not alone.
Right. It's about recognizing those little miracles in our own lives.
Yes.
The unexpected help, the sudden burst of energy, the moment of clarity that guides us forward.
I mean, like that.
Those can be our manna and our water from the rock.
Absolutely. The book of Numbers invites us to cultivate gratitude,
Yeah.
to shift our focus from what we lack to what we've been given,
Yeah.
even in the midst of hardship.
Now, speaking of wilderness survival, you can't get very far without a good leader.
That's right.
And that's where Moses comes in.
Moses, such a complex and compelling figure. He wasn't perfect, that's for sure.
Well, nobody is.
He had his moments of doubt, anger, even disobedience. But he was also incredibly humble and faithful. always coming back to God for guidance.
And the source material really highlights that role of mediator, that constant back and forth between God and the Israelites.
It's an important role.
It couldn't have been easy.
No kidding.
But think about the leadership challenges we face today.
Oh, yeah.
Building trust, making tough decisions, navigating conflicts.
That's not easy.
And Moses, despite his flaws, he shows us the way.
In many ways.
He reminds us of the importance of relying on a power greater than ourselves.
Yes.
Seeking wisdom through prayer and persevering even when things feel impossible.
I agree.
That's leadership gold right there.
It is. And there's this powerful visual that keeps recurring in the book of Numbers.
Oh.
The image of the cloud and fire above the tabernacle.
Oh, yes. That physical manifestation of God's presence, that constant reminder that they weren't alone in their journey. It's like a divine GPS system guiding them through the wilderness.
Exactly. It makes me wonder, how do we recognize those clouds and fires in our own lives?
Right.
Those moments of clarity, those signs of guidance, those little nudges that keep us moving in the right direction, even when we feel lost.
That's a great question.
It is.
Last time we were talking about those cloud and fire moments, those little signs of guidance
Right.
that can help us navigate our own personal wildernesses.
Yeah.
But the Israelites, even with those divine breadcrumbs, they still managed to get off track, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Human nature, right?
Yeah.
Even with the best intentions, we tend to stumble and make mistakes. And the Israelites were no exception.
Right.
The book of Numbers is full of stories about their rebellion, their complaints, and their downright disobedience.
It kind of makes you wonder if they could mess up with a pillar of fire, literally guiding them.
Yeah.
What hope is there for the rest of us?
That's where the beauty of grace comes in. The book of Numbers isn't just about judgment and consequences.
Right.
It's also about forgiveness, second chances, and the relentless love of God.
Okay.
Remember, these were people who had just escaped centuries of slavery.
Right.
They were starting from scratch,
Yeah.
learning to trust God to form a new identity. It was a messy process,
I bet.
full of missteps and setbacks.
It's like that saying, freedom is not the absence of commitment, but the ability to choose.
That's good.
And they were choosing sometimes poorly,
Yeah,
but they were learning along the way.
exactly. And the source material really highlights that learning process, both the triumphs and the failures.
Okay.
It doesn't shy away from the messiness of their journey,
Right.
which I think makes it all the more relatable.
So speaking of messy moments, one rebellion that really stands out is the story of Korah. I mean, talk about a power grab.
Oh, Korah.
Yeah.
He was a Levite,
Okay.
part of the priestly tribe,
Mhm.
but he wasn't content with his designated role. He wanted more power, more authority, and he gathered a whole group of followers to challenge Moses and Aaron's leadership.
Wow.
Basically, he staged a full-blown mutiny, claiming that everyone in the community was equally holy
Okay.
and therefore deserved an equal say.
Whoa. That's pretty audacious considering Moses was basically talking to God on a regular basis.
Right.
Did Korah have a direct line to the Almighty too, or?
Nope, not so much. His rebellion was a direct challenge to God's chosen order.
Yeah.
And the consequences were pretty dramatic. The earth literally opened up and swallowed Korah and his followers,
Oh,
demonstrating the seriousness of undermining God's authority.
wow. Talk about a mic drop moment.
Right?
I guess that puts an end to office politics, right?
For sure.
But seriously, what's the takeaway here for us today?
Well, I think it's a reminder to be mindful of our own motives.
Okay.
Are we seeking power for the sake of power?
Uh-huh.
Or are we motivated by a desire to serve others? Are we respectful of those in leadership positions,
Right.
even when we might not agree with them? The story of Korah's rebellion serves as a warning against pride, arrogance, and the dangers of trying to usurp God's authority.
Okay, point taken.
Yeah.
Humility is key.
Yes.
But the Israelites didn't always struggle with outright rebellion, did they?
That's true.
Sometimes it was more about those subtle acts of disobedience, those moments of grumbling and complaining.
Oh, absolutely. They were masters of the passive-aggressive complaint.
Right.
Like at Meribah, for example, when they were thirsty and started whining about the lack of water.
Ah, yes, Meribah, the place where Moses got a little too rock star with his leadership style.
Exactly. God told him to speak to the rock to bring forth water.
Right.
But Moses, frustrated with the Israelites' constant complaining, lost his cool and whacked the rock with his staff.
Yeah.
Not once, but twice.
Oops, not exactly following the divine memo there.
No.
What happened?
Well, water did flow.
Okay.
So on one level, mission accomplished, but Moses' disobedience,
Uh-huh.
that act of striking the rock instead of speaking to it, had consequences.
Hmm.
He was barred from entering the promised land.
Ouch. That seems like a pretty harsh punishment for a moment of frustration.
It might seem that way, but I think it highlights a really important point.
Okay.
Obedience isn't just about following rules for the sake of following rules.
Okay.
It's about trusting that God's commands are for our ultimate good, even when we don't fully understand them.
Right.
Moses, in that moment, let his anger and frustration get the better of him.
Yeah.
He didn't trust God to provide in the way he had promised.
So it was about the heart behind the action, not just the action itself.
Exactly. And it's a good reminder for all of us.
Yeah.
Our motives matter.
Right.
Why are we doing what we're doing?
Yeah.
Is it out of love, faith, and trust? Or are we operating from a place of fear, anger, or pride?
Right.
Our actions flow from the posture of our hearts.
Okay, that makes sense. But even with all their complaining and rebelling, God still provided for the Israelites, right?
He did.
Like the manna and quail, for example.
Oh, yes. Day after day, God miraculously provided food for them in the wilderness.
Right.
Bread from heaven, meat in the desert.
Yeah.
It was a constant reminder that they weren't alone, that he would sustain them even in the most barren of circumstances.
And then there's the story of water gushing from the rock.
Yes.
Not to be confused with the Meribah incident.
Right. In Exodus, God instructs Moses to strike the rock to bring forth water.
Okay.
But in Numbers, when the Israelites are again complaining about thirst, God tells Moses to speak to the rock.
Interesting.
It's almost like God is saying, okay, we've moved past the striking phase. Now it's time for you to trust me in a deeper way.
So even the method of provision evolves. Interesting. What's the significance of that shift?
I think it highlights the dynamic nature of faith.
Okay.
As we mature in our relationship with God, the ways in which he provides might change.
Okay.
We learn to trust him on a deeper level, to rely less on outward signs and more on his unseen hand at work.
It's like graduating from divine training wheels to riding a bicycle on our own, knowing that God is there even when we can't see him holding us up.
Exactly. It's about learning to recognize his provision in all its forms, the tangible and the intangible, the expected and the unexpected.
Speaking of unexpected, one story that always blows my mind is the whole Balaam saga. I mean, a pagan prophet hired to curse the Israelites ends up blessing them instead. That's a serious plot twist.
It is. Balak, the king of Moab, was terrified of the Israelites and their growing power.
Right.
He thought, hey, maybe I can hire a professional curser to take them down. Enter Balaam, this renowned soothsayer, who sets off on his mission to curse the Israelites, but every time he opens his mouth to utter a curse, God intervenes and blessings pour out instead.
But God is saying, nope, not today, Satan.
Yeah.
You're not messing with my chosen people.
Exactly. And I think it speaks to a fundamental truth. God's plans cannot be thwarted, no matter what forces might be arrayed against us. It's a story that encourages us to trust in God's ultimate control, even when circumstances seem chaotic or uncertain.
Okay, so we've talked about rebellion, provision, and divine intervention.
Right.
But there's also a lot of emphasis in the book of Numbers on the importance of order and structure, like the detailed instructions for building the tabernacle, for example.
Oh, yes. The tabernacle was the portable sanctuary where God's presence dwelt among the Israelites.
Oh, why?
Every detail from the materials used to the precise layout had symbolic significance.
Okay.
It was a tangible representation of their covenant relationship with God.
So it wasn't just about creating a fancy tent. There was a deeper meaning behind all the specifications.
Absolutely. The book of Numbers gives us a glimpse into the meticulous care God takes in creating a space for his presence. And I think it invites us to consider, what are the tabernacles in our own lives?
Right.
Where do we create space for God's presence to dwell? Is it in our homes, in our relationships, in our hearts?
And how do we build those spaces with intentionality and reverence?
Yes.
Just as the Israelites did with the tabernacle.
Those are great questions. And I think the book of Numbers offers some guidance.
Right.
It's about creating a space that's set apart, dedicated to God's purposes. It's about paying attention to the details, even the seemingly mundane ones,
Right.
and infusing them with meaning. It's about creating an environment where we can encounter God's presence in a tangible way.
So it's less about physical structures or more about cultivating an inner space, a sanctuary of the heart,
Yes.
where God can dwell.
Precisely. The tabernacle was a physical representation of that inner dwelling place.
Right.
It was a reminder that God's presence wasn't confined to a building,
Yeah.
but was available to them wherever they went.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Rebellion, provision, leadership. Significance of the tabernacle. It seems like the book of Numbers is like this epic tapestry woven together with threads of history, law, poetry, prophecy, and personal narrative.
It is. And as we explore this rich tapestry, we uncover profound truths about God ourselves and our journey of faith.
And even though it's set in an ancient wilderness, its lessons are timeless and universal. It speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart.
It does.
The desire for belonging, for meaning, for guidance, for hope.
And it points us to the one who can satisfy those longings.
Yes.
The one who leads us through every wilderness and into his promised land.
That's a great place to pause for now.
It is.
Next time, we'll unpack some of those timeless lessons and explore how they can help us navigate our own wilderness experiences. Welcome back to our exploration of the Book of Numbers we've spent the last 2 episodes unpacking.
The Israelites' journey through the wilderness.
Right, their struggles with obedience.
The divine provision that kept them going.
And the profound lessons embedded in their experiences.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has.
And I think what strikes me most is how relevant these ancient stories feel to our lives today.
Right.
We might not be wandering through a literal desert.
Right.
But we all face those wilderness seasons, those times of uncertainty. Yeah.
Testing and transformation.
So true. And in this final part, let's dive into some of the key takeaways from the Book of Numbers and how they can serve as guideposts for our own journeys of faith.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Well, one theme that keeps popping up is the idea of the wilderness as a metaphor for those times in our lives when we feel lost, disoriented, maybe even a bit scared.
Right.
It's that feeling of being in a liminal space, a place of transition, where the old ways of being no longer fit, and the new haven't quite emerged yet.
Yes. It's that in-between space where we're forced to confront our fears, our doubts, and our deeply held assumptions about ourselves and the world around us. And it's often in those uncomfortable spaces that we experience the most profound growth.
It's like that saying, sometimes you have to get lost to find yourself.
I like that.
But getting lost can be terrifying.
It can be.
The Israelites certainly had their fair share of meltdowns.
In the wilderness.
They sure did.
They complained, they rebelled. They even questioned God's goodness.
It makes you wonder.
It makes you wonder, how do we navigate those wilderness seasons without completely losing it?
Well, I think the Book of Numbers offers a few clues. First and foremost, it reminds us that we're not alone in the wilderness.
Right.
Even when we feel abandoned or forgotten, God is with us. He doesn't promise to shield us from hardship, but he does promise to walk with us through it.
It's like that image of the cloud and fire guiding the Israelites.
Yes.
It wasn't always a smooth or easy journey, but they always had that visual reminder of God's presence with them.
Exactly. And for us, those clouds and fires might look different. It might be a sense of peace in the midst of chaos. An unexpected act of kindness from a stranger, or a sudden insight that clarifies our path. The key is to cultivate an awareness of those divine breadcrumbs. Those little whispers of guidance that can keep us moving in the right direction.
The source material also emphasizes the importance of obedience.
It does.
It's almost like a refrain throughout the book.
It is.
When the Israelites obeyed God's commands, they were blessed. When they disobeyed, there were consequences.
And I think it's important to remember that obedience isn't about blind submission to a set of arbitrary rules. It's about aligning our lives with God's will. Which is ultimately for our good. Think of it like this. God's commands are like guardrails on a winding mountain road. They're there to keep us safe, to prevent us from veering off course and ending up in a ditch.
That's a great analogy, but let's be honest, we all veer off course sometimes.
We do.
The Israelites certainly did. They were masters of the U-turn, constantly testing God's patience with their rebellious choice.
They were. But even in their disobedience, we see glimpses of God's incredible mercy and grace. He was always ready to forgive them, to welcome them back into right relationship with him when they turned to him with repentant hearts.
It's a beautiful reminder that there's no limit to God's forgiveness.
That's right.
No matter how far we've strayed, no matter how many U-turns we've taken, we can always find our way back to him.
Absolutely. And that's the message of hope that shines through even the most challenging passages in the Book of Numbers.
Another theme that really struck me is the importance of gratitude.
Yes.
Despite their constant complaining, The Israelites were showered with blessings.
They were
Manna from heaven, water from a rock,
right.
protection from their enemies.
It's easy to focus on what we lack,
Yeah,
especially when we're going through a tough time.
right.
But the book of Numbers invites us to shift our perspective,
Okay.
to cultivate a spirit of gratitude for all that we have been given.
It's like that saying, what if today we were grateful for everything we have?
I like that.
It's a simple practice, but it can have a profound impact on our outlook.
It can.
When we focus on our blessings, we open ourselves to experience more joy, peace, and contentment.
Exactly. Gratitude is like a muscle
Okay.
that we need to exercise regularly.
Right.
The more we practice it, the stronger it becomes, and the more we're able to see the good, even in the midst of difficult circumstances.
Now, speaking of difficult circumstances, the Israelites' journey wasn't exactly a walk in the park.
No, it wasn't.
They faced constant challenges, internal conflicts, and external threats. And through it all, Moses had to lead them, guide them,
Right.
and somehow hold it all together.
Talk about a high-pressure job. I mean, imagine leading a group of people through the wilderness for 40 years.
I can't even imagine.
That's 40 years of complaints about the food. 40 years of grumbling about the lack of air conditioning. 40 years of mediating disputes
Wow.
and resolving conflicts. It's no wonder Moses had his moments of frustration and doubt.
Right. But he kept coming back to God for guidance, didn't he?
He did.
That's what struck me most about his leadership style. His humility, his willingness to acknowledge his own limitations and rely on a power greater than himself.
Yes. And I think that's a crucial lesson for anyone in a leadership position.
Right.
Whether you're leading a team at work, a family, or a community, it's not about having all the answers
Right.
or being the strongest or the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
It's about serving others, seeking
Yeah.
wisdom from God,
Right.
and pointing people to the one who is the ultimate source of strength and guidance.
And it's about remembering that we're all human. We all make mistakes.
Right.
And we all need grace. Moses wasn't perfect,
That's true.
but he was faithful. And that's what made him such a powerful leader.
Absolutely. And I think his story is a powerful reminder that God can use anyone, even those who are flawed and imperfect,
Right.
to accomplish his purposes.
Okay, so we've talked about the wilderness as a place of testing and transformation, the importance of obedience and gratitude,
Right.
and the qualities of faithful leadership.
Yes.
But there's one more theme I want to touch on.
Okay.
The constant reminder of God's presence
Right.
throughout the Israelites' journey.
Yes. From the cloud and fire above the tabernacle to the Ark of the Covenant, God's presence was a tangible reality for them.
And it wasn't just a passive presence, right?
Right.
God was actively involved in their lives, intervening in miraculous ways, guiding their steps,
Yes.
and protecting them from their enemies.
Right. And I think that's a powerful message for us today.
Okay.
We might not have a pillar of fire leading us through the wilderness,
Yeah.
but God's presence is still available to us if we seek it.
Okay.
It might be a still small voice whispering guidance, the sense of peace that surpasses understanding, or an overwhelming feeling of love and acceptance.
So, as we wrap up our exploration of the Book of Numbers, what are some final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'd say the Book of Numbers,
Oh.
despite its name,
Yeah.
is anything but dry or irrelevant.
Right.
It's a vibrant tapestry of stories, laws, poems, and prophecies that offer profound insights into the nature of God, the human condition, and our journey of faith.
It's a book that challenges us to trust God more deeply, to obey His commands, to cultivate gratitude, to persevere in our faith,
Yes.
even when things get tough.
And it points us to the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises in Jesus Christ, who leads us out of the wilderness and into the promised land of His eternal kingdom.
It's been an incredible journey exploring the Book of Numbers with you.
I agree. I always learn so much from these conversations.
And we hope our listeners have too. Remember, even though it was written thousands of years ago,
Yes.
the Book of Numbers is still relevant today. Its lessons about faith, obedience, leadership, and God's faithfulness are timeless and universal.
So as you go about your week, we challenge you to reflect on what you've learned.
Yeah.
And consider how you can apply these truths to your own life.
What wilderness are you facing right now?
That's right.
How can the lessons from the Book of Numbers help you navigate it and trust God's guidance?
May you experience God's presence, His provision, and His peace in every step of your journey.
Thanks for joining us.
Numbers begins with a census, reminding us that God sees and values each individual. But do we truly see ourselves the way God sees us? Each name listed in that census represented a unique purpose in God's plan. Reflect on your own life. Do you recognize your worth and purpose in His eyes? You are more than just a number in the crowd. You are part of His divine story. If you're inspired by this truth, subscribe, like, and comment. How do you see your role in God's plan? The Israelites' journey in the wilderness, as told in Numbers, highlights the challenges of trusting God when the path seems uncertain. How often do we grumble and complain when faced with difficulty? Reflect on your own response to life's struggles. Are you trusting God's provision, or do you try to handle things on your own? Remember, the wilderness can be a place of growth. If you're ready to trust God more deeply, subscribe, like, and comment. How are you learning to trust Him in your current struggles? The faithless report of the 10 spies in Numbers teaches us the dangers of fear and doubt. But how often do we allow fear to cloud our judgment? Reflect on the giants in your life, the obstacles that feel too big to overcome. Are you looking at the situation through God's eyes or your own? God has already equipped you for victory. If you're ready to face your fears with faith, subscribe, like, and comment. What giants are you ready to conquer with God's help? Numbers shows us that obedience is crucial, even when the journey feels long and hard. How many times have you doubted God's timing or direction? Reflect on areas where God has asked you to be patient or obedient, but you've struggled. Remember, obedience leads to blessing, even when the way forward is unclear. If you're ready to obey God even when it's difficult, subscribe, like, and comment. Where do you need to practice obedience today? In Numbers, God's presence in the tabernacle shows us the importance of staying close to Him, especially during uncertain times. But how often do we drift away from God when life gets tough? Reflect on your relationship with God. Are you drawing near to Him, or have you allowed distractions to take center stage? God longs for intimacy with His people. If you're ready to draw closer to Him, subscribe, like, and comment. How will you make space for God in your life today? The Israelites' repeated rebellion in Numbers shows us the consequences of disobedience. How many times do we ignore God's direction and face the consequences? Reflect on your own life. Are there areas where you've resisted God's guidance? Know that repentance brings restoration. If you're ready to turn back to God in areas of disobedience, subscribe, like, and comment. What area of your life is God calling you to surrender? The Levites' role in Numbers reminds us that God has a unique calling for each of His people. Just as the Levites were set apart for service, we are each called to serve God in different ways. Reflect on your own calling. How are you serving God in your daily life? Are you fulfilling your unique role, or are you waiting for the perfect opportunity? God has a purpose for you. If you're ready to step into it, subscribe, like, and comment. How are you serving God in your life? Numbers ends with the Israelites on the brink of entering the Promised Land, but with a reminder that faith and obedience are required to take possession of the promises. Are you ready to step into all that God has promised you? Reflect on how you can move forward with faith, trusting that God will give you the victory. The journey is long, but the reward is worth it. If you're ready to claim the promises God has for you, subscribe, like, and comment. What promises are you trusting God to fulfill in your life?